Hello and welcome again to another installment of Front Seat to Climate Change. Countries from around the world have gathered together in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for the COP27 summit to talk about how vulnerable countries can better manage or be prepared for the impending climate crisis. Now, one of the most confusing and complex aspects of climate change is attributing responsibility. Measuring greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, which are responsible for global warming, is a very complicated task. The most advanced methodologies still have some error margin. In 2020, it was estimated that the global cumulative emissions stand at 50 billion tons CO2 equivalent. CO2 equivalent here is the unit in which greenhouse gases are measured. Gases such as methane, which is also a greenhouse gas and is 30 times more dangerous than CO2, have been assigned this unit to gather together all these numbers. Among the biggest emitters is the USA and China, accounting for nearly 18% all global emissions. Countries like Pakistan, which are highly vulnerable, have very small amounts of emissions. In 2020, Pakistan's emissions stood at 0.88%, while its population stands at about 2.4% of the global population. While governance and development policies have a certain part in disaster prevention and disaster management, the primary trigger for these disasters is global warming. So countries which are not emitting at all but are highly vulnerable, how do they demand more climate justice? This is where the idea of loss and damage comes in. Now, loss and damage follows a very age-old principle. Anyone who is responsible for damages being caused to anyone else must pay monetary sum, resources, or something else. Now, loss and damage has always been a part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, but COP27 is the first time it has been formally placed on the agenda. We all know about mitigation and adaptation finance. These are instruments of climate finance to help poor countries prepare for climate change. Adaptation and mitigation funding goes into several projects which help advance these two fields. But loss and damage is fundamentally different.
But more needs to be done. The Prime Minister has said, if there is any doubt about loss and damage, go to Pakistan. There is loss and there is damage. And this COP needs to recognize it and needs to define a roadmap, a clear roadmap to deal with it, and including the creation of an institutional framework, including financing, in order to address the problems of loss and damage. And I hope that Pakistan will be able to benefit from these developments.
Loss and damage financing basically means that disasters that have already occurred, damages that have already been incurred by a nation, must be paid for by countries that are responsible. While loss and damage has entered the COP agenda, it's going to be very difficult because stronger countries of the developed north are the primary opponents. Because accepting the terms of loss and damage also brings the concept of liability. A country which agrees also accepts responsibility for global warming. And thus far, we have not seen any country accept. In the context of this, the US climate envoy, John Kerry, has actually come out and said that we do not see a climate finance facility being agreed upon. However, COP27 has already pushed us closer to an answer to the question that if we aren't responsible, how do we respond to this? Now, the challenge is that promises and words be turned into actions so that countries such as Pakistan and other developed countries can finally come closer to climate justice.